We've got a really fascinating stack of material here on the 1912 U.S. presidential election.
Ah, 1912. Yeah.
People often call it a political earthquake, and some sources even describe it as a four-way brawl.
It's a good way to put it. Definitely not your typical election.
So our goal here is, as always, to get you straight to the key insights from these sources. What makes 1912 so important?
Well, like you said, it wasn't just two main candidates. You had William Howard Taft, the incumbent,
Right.
then Theodore Roosevelt, the former president,
Mm-hmm.
Woodrow Wilson for the Democrats, and Eugene V. Debs for the Socialists.
There's a real mix, four distinct figures.
Exactly. And understanding this election, it really helps you understand a fundamental shift in American politics that was happening.
Okay, so we're going to unpack why it was so unusual, what led up to it, how it all played out, and crucially, what its lasting impact has been, all based on the material we've got in front of us.
Sounds good. So where to start? Maybe setting the stage.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so by 1912, the Republican Party, they'd been pretty much running the show for decades.
Right.
Dominant force.
Right.
But under the surface, trouble was brewing. Real tension within the party.
And a lot of that tension seemed to center around the president, William Howard Taft. Now, he was respected, a jurist actually handpicked by TR, right?
That's the irony. TR picked him, expected him to carry on the progressive mantle,
Right.
but the sources say many progressive Republicans felt Taft had, well, stalled, or maybe even reversed course. They saw him as too conservative, getting a bit too cozy with big business.
And leading the charge against Taft from within his own sort of faction was the man himself, Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, TR. The material really points to this feeling of profound betrayal on Roosevelt's part.
Betrayal. Strong word.
It is. He genuinely seemed to believe Taft had abandoned the cause, the progressive cause TR championed, and he felt it was his duty, almost, to step back in and, save the party's soul.
So this wasn't just like a minor policy disagreement. The sources painted as really personal, deeply ideological.
Oh, absolutely. Deeply personal. And it all just exploded at the Republican National Convention that year.
Right, the convention. Sounds like it was intense.
Intense doesn't quite cover it. It was bitter, bruising, really raw politics.
So you had Taft, who had the party machinery, the establishment, the delegates.
He controlled the levers of power within the party, yes.
So then Roosevelt, who felt he had the people behind him, the popular enthusiasm, the moral high ground, maybe?
That's exactly the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the accusations started flying. Talk of stolen delegates, shady backroom deals. It was pure political theater, but with very real stakes.
And the insight there is maybe how that party machinery could clash with popular feeling?
Yeah, it really highlighted that tension in the nomination process itself. Who really gets to choose the nominee?
So what was the outcome of the convention?
In the end, Taft's control held. He secured the Republican nomination.
And Roosevelt, he didn't just go home quietly.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
This is TR we're talking about. The sources describe him in a righteous fury. He didn't just walk out of the convention hall.
He walked out of the party.
Pretty much. He and his progressive allies bolted. It wasn't just a protest, it was a full-blown schism.
Leading directly to the Progressive Party,
Right.
which everyone started calling the Bull Moose Party.
Right, because TR famously declared he felt as strong as a bull moose.
That nickname stuck.
It really did. And you have to grasp how huge this was. A former president, a Republican icon, challenging his own party's chosen nominee by launching a major third party. It just showed how deep the Republican split had become.
Unprecedented. Okay, so the Republicans are basically fighting amongst themselves, tearing the party in two. What were the Democrats doing while all this drama was unfolding?
Good question. While the GOP was self-destructing, the Democrats were perhaps surprisingly unified and organized. They saw their chance.
They must have.
They had a strong field of potential candidates, but the figure who really emerged was Woodrow Wilson.
Wilson, the academic, right? President of Princeton, then governor of New Jersey. Not quite the household name that TR or Taft were at that point.
No, maybe more of a dark horse initially. But he was an intellectual, a progressive in his own right, and he offered a very different vision for the country. He managed to win the Democratic nomination after quite a few ballots himself.
So that sets the stage for this unique four-way contest. Let's break down the contenders and what they stood for. First, Taft, the Republican incumbent.
Taft was really in a bind. He was the sitting president, trying to defend his record, relying on party loyalty. But his campaign, the sources say, was kind of subdued.
And he was getting attacked from all sides.
From all sides. From Wilson and the Democrats, obviously. But the really damaging attacks came from his former friend and mentor, TR. That had to sting.
No kidding. Then you have Roosevelt, the bull moose candidate, boundless energy, right? Fiery speeches, his platform,
New nationalism.
new nationalism, yeah. TR's vision was all about a strong federal government. He believed the government needed to actively manage this new industrial economy.
By regulating corporations, protecting workers' rights, ensuring social justice, he saw the need for a powerful interventionist state to deal with these modern problems.
Okay, a strong federal manager. How did that contrast with Wilson, the Democrat, and his New Freedom?
It was a distinct contrast. Wilson's New Freedom was also progressive, but its focus was different. The core idea wasn't just managing big corporations, but breaking them up.
Ah, trust busting.
Exactly. Wilson wanted to dismantle monopolies, restore competition, and empower, individuals and smaller businesses. Less about centralized management, more about clearing the way for fair competition.
Interesting. So both progressive, but TR wants government as the powerful regulator. Wilson wants government to break up power concentrations.
That's a really good summary of the key difference. Two different paths to tackling the issues of industrialization.
And then there's the fourth candidate, often forgotten, Eugene V. Debs, the socialist.
Right, Debs. He's crucial to the story, even though nobody expected him to win.
Why is that?
Because he represented a truly radical alternative. He was speaking for workers, people who felt left behind or crushed by industrial capitalism. He was a veteran campaigner, very passionate.
So his campaign highlighted a different kind of dissatisfaction.
Absolutely. It showed that a significant chunk of the population wasn't happy with any of the mainstream options, whether it was Taft, TR, or Wilson. They wanted fundamental change to the system itself.
So the election became more than just choosing a person. It was really a debate about America's future, about government's role.
Definitely. It was a referendum. Should government manage big business like TR wanted, break it up like Wilson proposed, or take a more hands-off traditional approach like Taft seemed to represent, or something else entirely like Debs?
And the results? You said astounding earlier.
Astounding, yes, but maybe predictable in hindsight because of that Republican split.
Wilson won.
Wilson won, and decisively in the Electoral College, 435 votes. A landslide there.
But the popular vote?
That's the key insight the sources emphasize. He won with just under 42% of the popular vote.
Yeah.
A minority.
So the Republican split essentially handed him the presidency.
It absolutely did. If the Republican vote hadn't been divided between Taft and Roosevelt, the outcome could have been very different.
And Roosevelt, how did the bull moose do?
Incredibly well for a third party. Over 27% of the popular vote, 88 electoral votes. That's remarkable.
And he beat Taft.
He finished second, pushed the sitting president, Taft, into a distant third place.
Wow. How did Taft end up?
Only 8 electoral votes, just 23% of the popular vote. A real collapse for the incumbent and the official Republican Party.
And Debs, the socialist.
Debs pulled in nearly 6% of the popular vote. Didn't win any electoral votes, of course, but that 6% was a record high for a socialist candidate in the U.S. at that time. Showed the strength of that sentiment.
Okay, so a dramatic election, a fractured result. Why should you, listening now, care about this deep dive into 1912? What's the lasting impact?
Great question. There are several key impacts. First, it marked a major power shift.
The Democrats came back.
It's exactly. After decades of Republican dominance, this election cemented the Democratic Party's return as a major force in national politics. It set the stage for Wilson's presidency.
And during that presidency, he enacted some significant progressive reforms, right? The sources mentioned things like the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, the creation of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. These are foundational pieces of modern American government. And they came out of that progressive momentum Wilson rode into office.
Okay, second impact.
The Republican Party itself was fundamentally changed.
How so?
That progressive wing, the bull moose wing, led by TR, was effectively gone. Either they left, or they were pushed out, or they just lost influence after the split.
Leaving the party.
More conservative, more aligned with the establishment wing that had backed Taft. The sources suggest this deep ideological divide created in 1912 would shape the internal battles within the Republican Party for decades to come.
Interesting.
What else? Third parties. 1912 gives us a fascinating insight into their role.
Yeah, the bull moose party was huge for a moment.
It captured the public's imagination, showed a real desire for alternatives. But at the end of the day, even with a figure like TR, it couldn't break the hold of the two-party system.
So it showed both the potential power and the ultimate limitations.
Precisely. It highlighted the challenge third parties face in the American political structure.
And finally, any other big takeaways?
I think the biggest one is how the ideas debated in 1912 are still with us.
You mean the new nationalism versus the new freedom?
Exactly. That core tension, should the government actively manage and regulate the economy, like Roosevelt argued, or should it focus on breaking up concentrations of power to ensure competition, like Wilson argued?
Those aren't just historical arguments.
Not at all. They're fundamental questions that echo through American political debate right up to today. Discussions about economic regulation, antitrust policy, social welfare, the balance between government power and individual liberty. You can trace the roots of many of those arguments back to the debates crystallized in 1912.
So looking back at 1912 isn't just history class stuff. It was genuinely a pivotal moment.
Absolutely. It reshaped the parties, it led to major policy changes, and it framed these core ideological debates that we're still grappling with.
It really shows how one election, fueled by personality clashes and deep disagreements about the country's direction, can just send these shockwaves through the system that last for generations.
It really does. It's a reminder that politics isn't static. Even when things seem stable, deep divides and strong personalities can change everything.
So maybe a final thought for you to ponder based on all this. How do you see those fundamental tensions from 1912 playing out now? That balancing act between government regulation and free competition, or that ongoing challenge for different voices for third parties to really break through. Do you see those same dynamics shaping the political conversations and outcomes you follow today? Something to think about.